Hi, I'm Chris, or Christy, however you want to call me. I'm the president of 3D Modeling Society, and welcome to our first Blender course for beginners and for anyone who just wants to get into Blender for that matter. So if you have your Blender open, you should get something like this. This is what you should see. So this is something called a splash screen. You can just click out of it, and this is what you will be met with. Now, in order to move around, let me just first turn on my screencast keys so that everyone can see what I'm clicking. So if you are a bit lost and don't understand what I'm doing and what's being clicked, down here you should be able to see anything that's being clicked and any keys or parts of the mouse that were used. So to move around the scene, you would usually use the middle mouse button. So if you just hold the middle mouse button, you can move the scene around. This will just rotate the camera. So if you wanted to completely move it, if you hold Shift and click, you can move it completely all around. Now let's look at some basics of the actual objects. This is a cube, as you might notice, and this is what you're going to be met with. This is what we call the default cube. To get rid of it, or delete any object for that matter, you would either go into Object, Delete, so from up here, or by pressing X. And that's how you would get rid of an object. To bring it back, or to redo any kind of thing you have done already, you would use either Edit, Undo, or you'd use Control Z. So if I go redo, and you see Control Z, it will come back. This is a very common shortcut that is used throughout many programs. I think even Microsoft ones would use this for undo. Now, you might ask yourself, why do you have to learn these like shortcuts? Well, you could always just go through the different menus, but that's going to take a lot of time, especially if you're going to work through a very complex scene, you're doing a lot of things. You want to be able to do things as quickly as possible. So it's best that you learn these shortcuts, these hotkeys. And if you feel lost now, I'm going to put at the end a, I'm going to send you either through your email, or I'm going to try and see if I can upload it here in the actual meeting chat, a little document filled with all of the shortcuts that you need, given to us very nicely by Blender Guru. All right, so let's now look at the movement of an object. So just a boring cube that stays in the middle is not very interesting. So to move it around, you'd use, for example, this. If you click here on move, you would be greeted with your axes right here. We have a question, I think. Yes, the session is being recorded right now, so don't worry. All right. Oh yeah, and I should mention that to select an object, you just left click. To deselect, you just click outside of it. So you can move them on specific axes by just dragging them along, by using the G key. So the G key would lead to you sort of grabbing the object and moving it around. So if you just do that, you see you can move it wherever you want. Left click, let's go, and put it wherever you wanted them to be. If you feel like you've clicked by accident, right clicking will set it back to its original position. If you want to move on a specific axis, you would click G to grab it, and then the axis name. So in this case, let's say you want to move on the x-axis, X would snap it to the x-axis, Y on the y-axis, Z on the z-axis. if you wanted to go on a certain plane, so for example, the XY plane, so this would mean you'd omit the Z axis. You'd say G, Shift, and the axis you want to omit, in this case, Z, and moves only on the XY plane, ignoring the vertical axis. If you wanted to move on a specific distance, for example, let's say we wanted to go 1 unit up, you'd say G, Z, 1. It would move 1 unit up. All of these apply for the other options. So if you wanted to rotate it, again, you can do this in the exact same way, except instead of using the G key, you use the R key. So with R, you move it around, or you click here and you can select these. And you don't need to have one of these selected to use the hotkeys. You can use the hotkeys whenever. These are here just so that you might want to actually see the axes you're moving, and which can sometimes be helpful. So again, here, if you wanted to move this cube, rotate this cube around the x-axis for 45 degrees, let's say. So you'd say R, X for the x-axis, and then 45. And it's now rotated 45 degrees. Finally, we have scaling. So scaling would be the actual changing of the size of an object. So here you can, of course, if you just grab the white rim, changing it completely in all directions or on a specific axis. And if you want to use the hotkey, that's S for scaling. And again, just like before, you can scale it on a specific axis by clicking the name of the axis, so Z or X. And if you want to be really, I guess, adventurous, you can just click on transform and have all of the axes all together at once on the screen. Now let's talk about actually adding objects. So just one cube, just one simple cube is not very interesting. So if you want to add an object, you can either go add and add whatever object you want. You'd be mostly working with meshes. So let's say you wanted to add a sphere. It's in here, but you don't see it because it's inside the cube. So if you go and delete the cube, it's here. So if you wanted to add it somewhere else, you would use the 3D cursor. So the 3D cursor is this little thing in the center right here, and it determines a variety of things. Most importantly for you would be the actual position of where an object will be spawned when you add it. So if you click this button here for cursor, you can click and assign a position on the screen. And then when you add, which you can do either from here or using the shortcut Shift A, you can add, let's say, the sphere. And now the sphere is where we want it to be. Keep in mind that you cannot undo the changing position for the 3D cursor. If you wanted to do that, one way of doing is by clicking N and going, and you will be greeted with this little nice, how do you call it, menu. And going into view, and here you can find a 3D cursor location, which you can set to, let's say, 0, 0, 0. Remember to change back to your selection. Otherwise, you'll be keep clicking around and wondering why is your cursor keep just teleporting everywhere. The N tab also gives you access to these transform and rotation tabs, which you can also find in your object properties panel on the side here, which is this orange square. And here you can also change things like the location rotation, and scaling of an object. And especially if you do any kind of engineering or something that you'd be wanting to use, for example, in a, I don't know, 3D printer, you can set dimensions that are in exact values. So here, for example, I can make it to be 1 meter on the x-axis, and this would be in 1 meter length. So we're almost done with the actual UI. So let's look at this. This hub here is called the outliner or hierarchy if you use something like Unity before. And here you can find all the objects in your scene. So if you want to find an object, you can just click on it from here. And the reason this is important is because it gives you access to collections. And collections are these, well, collections of objects. And the advantage is you can give everything in a collection a specific property, or most often it allows you to hide them quickly. So if you had a very complex scene with, let's say, a car that has wheels. So let's say we have this, let's scale it on the x-axis. I think I could see by accident. You see, and we add a circle, scale it, and you wanted to make this your wheel, but in order to work on your wheel, you would have you have this whole car in the middle, like going through it. So if you wanted to make it disappear, you could click on the entire collection to get rid of it, instead of actually having to click on each individual piece of it if it was made of multiple pieces. And to create the collection, you just right-click, new collection, and then you can drag objects inside of them. Let me just reopen this so I have everything back together. All right. Finally, probably just a quick note on perspective and orthographic. This is the general normal view that you would be greeted with, and you'll be using for like 90% of your workflow. This is called perspective, and there's another one called orthographic, which you can change from here or from number pad 5. It looks weird, but that's because you're not meant to look at it from the side, but usually from one of the axes. So if you click, for example, 1, you'd be looking from the y-axis, so you can see the x and the z-axis, and you have this nice grid to help you model things to very precise measurements. And the same goes for 7 from the top, 3 from the x-axis, and alt and one of the numbers, oops, sorry, not alt, control, one of the axes will do the trick. Let me just start this again. Okay, I think everyone is it's already quite sick of these kind of things. So let's get into actual modeling. So today we will be modeling the first part of our scene. So let me try and give you just a quick glimpse of what that would be. Stop sharing for a second. And so this is what we will be making eventually, something that looks something like this. And we'll be starting with the pencils and the little cup that they will be staying in. Let me go back to Blender. So in order to do this, we need to go into edit mode. You can either do this by going here and clicking object mode and then going into edit mode. You can also do this by the hotkey tab, or you can choose the specific modeling workspace, which here are different workspaces which you might choose to use later on. To start, I think we have to discuss what these orange points and things are. These points are known as vertices, singular vertex, and they are what makes up any kind of 3D object. So any 3D object is made from vertices. Two vertices create an edge, and three or more vertices create a face. And you can also select them individually. Either you can choose from here to have only vertices, edges to be selected, or faces. Okay, so if you have it stuck to your cursor, left click will release it, right click will put it back to its original position. All right. And these points, so these vertices can be moved exactly the same way. So with G, you can move them around. You can scale, for example, edges, make them longer, shorter, or even faces. Scale them, rotate them, and move them around. Okay. Okay, if you're still having issues, if you want, we can talk more at the end, and I'll see if we can solve that problem. Until then, just try and follow along. Okay. So let's start making our pencils. So here's a question. If we want to make a pencil, what should the starting object for us be? So what's the thing that would be, what you believe would be best for us to use? So if you go into add, what would be the best of these to start with? You can write in the chat, or yes, exactly, a cylinder. So if we added a cylinder, let's see. Where is the cylinder? Looks pretty good. But you might have noticed, let me see if I grab actual, how would you call this? A crayon or a pencil usually has this kind of hexagon shape. And I think, and for this, a slightly better option, albeit not much better, but just tiny bit better for this purposes would be a circle. Now, you might ask yourself, why a circle? Because it doesn't look anything like a hexagon. Well, we can choose the number of vertices here. At the start, just make sure you don't click out of it, because the moment it gets created, if you click out, you won't be able to return to this panel. So just keep that in mind. And if you click here, instead of 32, click 6. And we have a hexagon. Okay, so we click out, we have our hexagon. So now let's go into tab, and how would we create our hexagonal cylinder? Well, first we want to make this from just a bunch of lines into a solid object. So we will do that by creating a face from all of these vertices. To do that, press F for face, and bam, we got ourselves a face. Now, this is still flat. This still is just a flat object, so not much interesting to it. To make it more interesting, we would use something called extrusion. So you can either do that using the extrude tool on this side and grabbing this and dragging up. And you got yourself a cylinder with just 6 sides. Or alternatively, you can do the same using the E key. So if you press E for extrude, you will extrude it up on the Z axis. And just like with the others, you can extrude it for a certain amount if you just write the number. So if I want to do it for 5, you would go 5 units up. And you can also say a specific axis, but in our case, the only axis that really works is up. A bit higher. Okay, so we have our pencil, but it's not ready because it still looks a bit weird. It's very flat. So to make it sharp, we just do again another extrusion. So if you press E again, extrude again to the length that you'd imagine your tip to be. So let's say that much. And then we would scale it. So just press S and scale. And we've got our pencil. Now we could either just leave it at this, or we can combine all of these points into a single one. So if I press X, you can delete them. So you can, if you were to delete vertices, things work very differently from objects. So if I were to delete these vertices, things would look very bad. I would lose the entire thing because there's nothing to connect them to. If I deleted the edges, I'm left with just a bunch of lines. And if I deleted only the faces, I delete only this little face that is in between them. All we want is to collapse them. So collapse edge and faces, and we'll collapse them to one single sharp point. You can either do it this way, or just keep them here and just make it small, and that can sometimes be better. We'll just let it like that for now. And this is the most basic of pencils. Let's say we want put it, maybe it's a bit thick. So let's say if you want to select everything in a scene, or in our case, because we are in edit mode, all the pieces of an object, you'd click A. So just press A, and that's A for all. To deselect everything, just double press A very quickly, or Alt A. So if you press A, Alt A will do the exact same thing. And we said scale, and we want to make it thinner, but not shorter. So we want to be scaled on anything but the Z axis. So there's a bit thinner. And we have the most basic kind of pencil. Let's now also rotate it a bit around the Z, around the X axis, and we say 90 degrees. Here you can also change the angle if you wanted specific angle again, because it looks better to have it on the side. Now, another issue that you might get into later on if you create objects like this is that you notice that we started with that original, how would you call it? The original circle, and the origin. So that would be kind of the, you could say, center of mass of the object, or the pivot point of the object, remained down there at the level of the circle, which is not good, because now if you wanted to rotate the object, you wouldn't rotate it from where you would expect, which would be in the middle of it, but rather from the bottom of it, which feels exceptionally bad and unpleasant to do. So to do exactly what, to actually move this to the center, you would right click on it, set origin, and origin to geometry, which means that you're moving the origin of the object to the center of the geometry, or the closest thing to a center of mass for it. And now when you rotate it, it feels a bit better. because you're rotating it from a more physical point. But I don't think anyone wants to have just a little pencil. So if you wanted to make multiple pencils, you can copy it. So you can either, I think you could have here as well, right? I don't think you can. Yeah, you can duplicate the object. So you say duplicate objects, and you have it here. Again, this snapped to your cursor. So left click to let go. The hotkey for that is Shift D. If you right click, it will put it in the exact same position as the original object. So make sure to move it away from its original position, or otherwise they're on top of each other and you can't tell. Of course, you can always just check out the outliner and find the objects, and you can rename them as well. So if we wanted to just say this pencil, say it automatically says pencil 1, so let's say pencil 2. This will be pencil 1. And again, you can make them into their own collection. So let's say you can make it your own collection here, and let's say let's call it pencils. And just one shift to just hold shift to be able to access more than one object. Grab it and put them inside. And now if you want to hide them, only them, you can have it from here. Or you can do it individually with this little eye icon. Okay. So now we have some pencils and we have our collection. So let's remember what we said we're going to do today. We were going to actually make also those, how would you call it? The actual container we're going to hold these pencils in. So a kind of little pencil cup. So let's hide the pencils for now so that they don't get in the way. And let's create the cup. So for a cup, let's start again from a circle. Oh no. The cursor is not in the right position. So always remember to have your cursor in the right position. Otherwise, things will be spawned in places you do not expect. And then you're asking yourself why you keep on adding objects which appear to be nowhere. A mesh circle. And see, it remembers that last time we had 6 vertices. This time we don't want that. Let's say the original 32. So it's more of a circle. So basically you could argue that a circle is nothing more than a polygon with a lot of edges. That's what you could argue a circle is. So you can make it smoother with more or less smooth with fewer. So let's go back there. And in 3D, we call these n-gons. So a hexagon has 6, heptagon has 7, n-gon has n number. So this would be a 32-gon, I guess. So let's go into tab. This time we don't want to actually create the face, because that would mean if we created the face and extruded this, we get a cylinder again. But a cup, you might remember, does not have a top. So that's not ideal. So instead, we're just going to extrude this edge, which the result will be something like this. So extrude up, remember z-axis, and let's say something like that. And what you have here is a cylinder that is empty. So an empty cylinder. Next, let's try and make a kind of for our cup. So for that, let's extrude a bit, again on the z-axis, bit here, scale it out, extrude again z, scale it slightly in, then extrude again, right click to put it back where it is, and then scale it in. And we made a little rim for it. Now I think it's worth talking about something called geometry. So the geometry of an object represents the collection of all of its vertices, edges, and faces. And if you ever look at a more advanced 3D tutorial, they will talk about the importance of good geometry. And good geometry means squares, especially, and the closer you have your faces to squares, the better things are. So let's see a way we can make these squares, because these are actually, as you can tell, if we just go into the face select mode, very long rectangles, which are not good, because then any kind of texture, which is effectively an image that we put on this, would be stretched, which is not ideal. To do that, we will use the loop cut tool. Loop cuts are effectively just these lines that go all around a mesh. So we're just going to click there, and here we can choose the number of cuts. So if you just hold and drag, we will see that we get these, and we'll do it until we see squares. That looks more like squares, so something like 14 is good. All right, but it looks a bit boring just having it this way. So now let's talk about another important tool, proportional editing. Proportional editing involves, so if you were to grab just one vertex and move it around, you see it has this sharp, bad looking movement. If I were to do the same, if I were to select an entire row of vertices, which you can do by holding Alt and clicking on the row. So Alt, clicking on the row, and let's say scale, it's again just sharp as it affects only those vertices. Proportional editing means that you can now influence more vertices, and there'll be a proportional fall off that is dependent on the function you choose here. So a smooth function looks like this. So it has this smooth cross section, kind of like a Gaussian. A sphere would have it more sphere-like, and sharper. Generally, smooth is a pretty good one. So let's Alt press on this and scale. And you see that you get this circle around your cursor. That circle shows you the area that will be affected by proportional editing. Anything outside of that circle will not be affected. To change the size of the circle, you just use your mouse wheel. So your mouse wheel will increase, so going out and in. So let's say we go something like that, just to make it a bit more vase-like, I guess. Okay. If we go out of edit mode, we can take a look at our object. Looks good, but you'll notice it looks very blocky. It looks like it's made out of a bunch of pieces of paper, or just one very big piece of paper that has been kind of just folded into this shape. Oh yeah, just remember that our cylinder does not have a bottom because we didn't make one, so just press F for that. And we got our bottom. So to make it look smooth, one way you could do it is right click and shade smooth, which looks pretty good. But you will notice that there are still some sharp kind of angled edges around it, which don't look very pleasing to the eye. Not to mention that here around the base, you see this kind of weird rim, which is unpleasant. So this is what you call a shading issue. To solve this, we will go into this tab. So click on the one that has this little wrench, and this is where you get modifiers. Modifiers are these amazing tools that allow you to change objects in very specific ways. So there's an array modifier allowing you to put multiple objects in one after another. Bevel, well, as the name suggests, bevels the edges. Boolean can add, subtract objects from each other, etc., etc. We will use subdivision surface. Subdivision surface, or subsurf, is probably the most used modifier in all of Blender. So if you do anything in Blender, unless it is exceptionally blocky, you will use subdivision surface. And what it does is subdivides. That means it adds more loop cuts all around and making it more detailed. So more vertices all over. That's what subdivision means. And here you can change the level of subdivisions. So here in the viewport, we have one level. Render means how many you will be seen in the actual result. So if you increase them, you get more detail. You can't see it here very well, but hopefully see how if you click, it gets better. Also here at the bottom, you can see the actual information. If you can't see it, just right click and make sure that scene statistics are on. And you can see that how the number of vertices, where it says verts, increases when I click. So it goes from 2000 to 9000, 37,000 to 149,000, which is when things start getting bad. So be exceptionally cautious with the subdivision surface modifier. Blender technically does not have a proper system requirements. Any computer can technically run Blender, but the better your computer, so the better things will run, especially if you have more memory. Which is why you should be careful, because if you take this number too high, your whole computer could freeze and it could crash. Best case scenario, Blender crashes. Worst case scenario, your computer gets fried. Okay, no, maybe not quite that bad, but it does crash. So do not make this number too big. When you see that it starts taking too long to respond, stop and think what you're doing. Also, don't worry about Simple and Catmull-Clark. That's a different story. Just stay on Catmull-Clark. Okay, but if we go inside our mesh, we see this. Oh no, what happened to the bottom? Because if we get rid of this, you see that we had no problem, but now we have this weird sun pattern, which if you like it, I guess you can keep it, but is not exceptionally good for shading. So to get rid of it, we will use another tool called, where is it? Insert face. I can see it. The insert faces, or I. So if we go back to the bottom, Alt press to get the entire rim. Maybe from the bottom is a bit easier to see. And then press I. And drag this towards the center. And now it's gone. So basically what we did here is, she's mostly gone. It might still be, it's still kind of here, but turn off that, yeah. Yeah, it's mostly gone. So you mostly cannot see it. What we did there is something called a proximity loop. So basically, if sometimes the subdivision surface modifier can do these kind of artifacts, and by adding these kinds of loops or inserts, you can solve them. You'll get more used to them as we move along. So now we have our object, and frankly, you could leave it at this. This is the way you could leave it. Or you'll notice that it does have a fairly thin rim, so we could add a solidify modifier. What a solidify modifier does is add, well, a thickness, as it says here, and let's say something like a 0.03 meters in this case, and this will give us a nice thick rim that will look like it's made out of wood or plastic or something like that. And here are all your modifiers. You can choose to add them, to apply them, but you don't have to do it unless absolutely necessary. And that's because it's best that you keep them around in case you want to find some kind of, you have some problems or you want to modify something, because once you apply them, it's gone. You can't find it anymore. And this is what you'd call a non-destructive workflow, because you are able to keep going back and changing things. A destructive workflow would mean that once you've done it, you have to keep going or start all over again. So always be careful and keep your objects around. Also, the order these modifiers go does influence the way they interact, but we won't get into that whole thing. So now we have our little cup. So let's bring our pencils back. Actually, let's change this to cup. All right, let's bring our pencils back. You'll notice they're a bit too big, so let's take them and scale them. Oops. Scale them to a more appropriate size. Maybe a bit too short. Scale on the, what's this, y-axis. Make them longer a bit. Yeah, that looks better. Okay. Now let's rotate them around the x-axis. 90, actually no, minus. Yeah. Why is it doing this? Okay, rotate minus 90. Actually no, it's 90. Z. Why is it not going? Anyway, something like that. Ah, I see. Okay. So now let's add them inside. So if we just grab one of them, say G to move it in, and make sure it doesn't go through. So G on the Z-axis, make sure it doesn't go through. And let's say we want to angle it. So angle it just a bit. So you can just eyeball this one until it looks kind of all right for you. So this would be up to really you how you want to position them. And also the cup can be made any shape you want. So just experiment with the different fall-offs of the proportional editing. So don't worry too much if it doesn't look exactly like this. As long as it has a generally cup shape, you can do it. All right, oops. And also I should mention that proportional editing does influence movement and rotation as well. So be careful when you have it on. So there, rotate it a bit on the all axes like that. That's where it touches. And you got your little cup. And you could, for example, just Shift D all of these, rotate around the Z-axis by 90, and you got more of them just placed in this kind of pattern. And also, if things move in between each other, as long as people can't see it, you don't have to worry, because if this is how people will see your object, you don't care if things don't necessarily, okay, let me just move them so that they don't pass through, because maybe that people might see that. Okay, so they don't pass through. Okay, well, I think this is most of what we'll be getting to today. If you want to change any of these, you can always go into tab, edit mode, and modify them any way you want. Again, I think we actually have some time to discuss a bit selection. So if you want to select things around, I've already discussed that you can click on them. You can change selection mode from up here into just vertices, edges, and faces. But there are a couple other methods. So if you wanted to, for example, select, let's say, only these ones, you could do this with just dragging a box around it, or using B and using box select. It is almost the exact same thing. Another one is C, which is circle select. So you have this thing around your cursor, and if you just click, you will select anything that enters that circle. And you can also, just with like proportional editing, making it larger and smaller using your mouse wheel. And right click to get rid of it. And I think we can also look at what we have up here. These are different ways you can look at the entire scene. So what you've been seeing so far is what we call solid mode or solid shading, which is just the very simple objects. Nothing, no color, no anything to them. You can change, you can put colors kind of to them in this viewport, but that's beyond the scope of this tutorial. If you wanted to see them in a more bare bones approach, you can literally see their bare bones, which is this. We call this a wireframe, and you can see only the edges, which allows you to see through objects more easily and work around it. So you can see what happens here with this subdivision surface modifier and why we had to put it in there so that it doesn't appear all over the place. The other two are, I believe this is called material preview. I think most people call it something like either material view or look dev, because it's great for development of materials and you don't have to render the entire scene for it. And of course you have rendered view, which shows you how the object would look when rendered. Here again, rendered means having the whole scene built by the computer in its final form. Okay. So this would be all for today. Now, as a little bonus, I will show you a little thing. So first of all, before anything happens, remember to save. So either with Control S or going here and clicking save will save wherever you want your thing saved. And you change it from here to whatever you want. In this case, let's say we're going to call it tutorial, but however you want to change it. And all Blender files are called .blend. So if I just go save Blender file, and it's saved. So let's show you a little bit of a miscellaneous thing. Little cool. So we're gonna do this at every session if you like it. If you feel like it's not worth it, you can always leave at this point. So if we go into preferences, we can access probably one of the most amazing things that makes Blender so unique: add-ons. So software that are like bought from online, have disadvantage of being already built. There's nothing you can really add to them. But Blender is open source, meaning that you have this amazing array of add-ons, and these are the ones that come with Blender. Almost nothing here has been added by me, but there are plenty of ones that you can either buy or get for free from online and just install from here. So let's look at some of them that are a bit cool. One here is extra objects, for example. And that's curve. We want the here, add mesh, extra objects. It'll take a little while for it to load. All right. And let's say also Bolt Factory and Archimesh. There are lots of other ones that you can try to click on them and have them on. It's really up to you. And the nice thing that these add is when we do Shift A to add an object, let me put the cup here in the pencils so we can hide it.
Excuse me.
Yes?
We can't see the preferences. Window preferences. So we didn't see anything. Sorry.
You mean you cannot find it at all?
Yeah, we didn't see how you add on the mesh.
Oh, I see. Sorry. I think it yeah, I was not showing the scene. Oh, right, I forgot.
No.
Let me try that again. Screen. Okay. Can you see it now?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Yeah. So here in preferences, you have them. So if we just go down here we have the ones that I clicked on. So Archimesh, Bolt Factory, and extra objects. So these three are just some of them. There are lots of other ones that you can get through, but it's up to you to click on them and get them in. So now if we go and say Shift Add, if we go down here, I think we have somewhere, no, here in Mesh. Here in Mesh, we have some other things. For example, gears. So Bolt Factory gives us access to gears. These nice little thingies right here. And you can set all the things from number of teeth to a radius and width. So if you want to do some engineering stuff in Blender, you technically could, especially if you want to do some 3D printing with these. Other nice things that you can add were, yeah, this rock generator. So you have weird rocks that you can make. And really, it's so many different weird things. Let me add it from here. It's easier to see them. Diamonds, so brilliant diamond. Here's our diamond. Scale it, make more segments. Pavilion. And all of these are objects that you can add from the get-go through these add-ons. Torus objects, I like the torus knot. Looks really weird. I think this is even a kind of pagan symbol, I believe. And really, the sky is the limit with Blender add-ons. So with that said, I think this will be the end of the first Blender class. If you have any questions, you can stay here till the end and we can discuss them. Or if you feel like you don't have any questions now, you can always either give us an email or a message on Facebook.